Welcome to DC Broadcast Podcast, your direct community broadcast, your trusted source for education, entertainment, and everything in between. Stay connected, stay informed, and stay entertained. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into something pretty big, literally and figuratively. We're talking about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. GERD for short.
GERD. It's been in the news a lot lately.
Yeah, and I have to admit, before we got the source material, I was kind of like, a dam, really.
Right.
But the more I looked into it, the more fascinating it got. It's not just a dam, right?
Right. It's this huge symbol of Pan-Africanism, this whole idea of African nations taking control of their destiny, their resources.
And for our listeners who haven't been following this too closely, maybe we should, start with the basics. We're talking about Africa's largest hydroelectric dam.
Yep, the biggest one on the continent. And it's going to generate a ton of electricity, something like over 6,000 megawatts when it's fully operational.
Wow, 6,000? That's, when you put that in perspective, that's enough to power millions of homes. And not just in Ethiopia, right? We're talking about the potential to export energy to neighboring countries.
Exactly. It could be a game changer for the whole region.
Okay, so we've got this massive dam, this huge potential for energy. But to understand why it's such a big deal in terms of Pan-Africanism, we kind of have to go back to the source, literally. So where does it all begin?
Well, we got to start with Lake Tana in Ethiopia.
Lake Tana, right.
That's where the Blue Nile starts its journey, flowing north, eventually meeting up with the White Nile in Sudan, and then boom, the Nile River.
And I mean, the Nile, it's like
Good.
the Nile, it's the river, right? Essential for life, for agriculture, for everything, really. Historically, I mean, it's been the lifeblood of civilizations in Egypt, Sudan for centuries.
Absolutely. And you can't talk about the Nile without talking about the Blue Nile. It provides something like 85% of the Nile's water. Think about that. 85% coming from Ethiopia.
85%? Yeah, so it's like, whoa, suddenly Ethiopia is holding a lot of cards. Imagine if the source of your most vital resource was controlled by another country. That's got to be, I don't know, a little unnerving.
For sure. And that feeling, that desire to have more control over something so essential, that's really at the heart of the whole GERD project.
It's about shifting the power dynamic.
Yeah.
Because historically, those downstream countries, especially Egypt, they've had a lot of say over how the Nile's water is used. But GERD is like, Ethiopia saying, hold on a second. This is our resource, too.
Exactly. And it's not just about the present, it's about the future, too. Ethiopia, they're saying, we want to use this resource to develop our own country. They want to meet their own energy needs and maybe even become a major energy exporter.
Yeah, boosting their economy, their influence in the region. So this is where it gets really interesting, right? This is where we start talking about Pan-Africanism. I'll be honest, before I really dug into this, my understanding of Pan-Africanism was pretty, surface level. But think about it like this. Imagine that feeling of not having control over something you absolutely need, something vital. A lot of African nations, they've felt that way about their resources for a long time.
Yeah, and Pan-Africanism is about changing that. It's about solidarity, self-reliance among African nations. It's this vision of a future where they work together, they control their own destinies, and they, ultimately thrive.
And it's not just some utopian dream, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing it play out in real life with GERD. It's like, okay, here's this concrete example of how this vision can become reality. So how does GERD, a giant dam, embody these Pan-African ideals? It seems like kind of a leap, from a construction project to this bigger vision of a united and empowered Africa.
It is a leap, but it's a powerful one. First of all, it demonstrates this thing called resource sovereignty. Ethiopia is saying, we have a right to use our own resources to benefit our people, and that's a message that resonates with a lot of other African countries facing similar challenges.
It's setting a precedent, kind of like saying, look, we can do this and you can too. It's about reclaiming control, pushing back against those historical power imbalances.
Exactly. And then there's the whole energy independence thing. GERD, it could be a game changer for Ethiopia's economy, like lifting millions of people out of poverty. But it also has the potential to go beyond Ethiopia's borders, right?
Because they could become this, energy powerhouse, exporting electricity to their neighbors. And a lot of those neighboring countries, they're struggling with energy poverty.
Yeah.
So, suddenly you've got this potential for regional cooperation, for shared prosperity.
Right. And you also have this kind of forced dialogue. They have to talk about how to manage a shared resource, the Nile River. I mean, they have to figure this out together.
Which, let's be real, can lead to some tension. I mean, water is a pretty sensitive issue.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about countries that depend on it for everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not all going to be smooth sailing, but maybe a little tension isn't always a bad thing, right? Could be a catalyst for some real progress.
And that's the thing about Pan-Africanism. It's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk. And GRD is action. It's massive action. I mean, think about it. This project, it's primarily funded and built by Ethiopians.
They're not relying on foreign aid or foreign expertise. They're saying, we can do this ourselves.
It's a huge statement about African capability, African ingenuity.
It's like they're rewriting the narrative,
Yeah.
challenging the idea that Africa always needs outside help to solve its problems.
GRD is saying, no, we can handle this. We can invest in ourselves. We can build our own future. But let's be real. A project of this scale, it's going to have its challenges. And we've already kind of touched on the potential for some diplomatic tensions over water sharing. What else? What other hurdles does GRD face?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't build something this big without some impact, right? One of the biggest concerns with GRD is the potential environmental effects.
Right, we're talking clean energy, but we can't just ignore the potential downsides. What kind of impacts are we looking at here?
Well, big dams, they can really disrupt ecosystems, They can mess with fish migration patterns, change the way water flows, even displace entire communities who live in the area.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to see people lose their homes or their livelihoods because of the development project. So, is Ethiopia doing anything to mitigate those risks?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They're taking steps, trying to address some of these issues. Like they've included fish ladders in the dam design to help the fish get around. And they're doing environmental impact assessments, trying to figure out what the effects are going to be. Plus, they've got plans to compensate those communities that might be affected, try to make sure they're not left behind.
That's good to hear. But I mean, come on, it's a huge project, a lot of unknowns. Are those measures really going to be enough?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Some critics argue that, it's not enough, that the long-term environmental consequences are still, pretty uncertain.
It's a balancing act, right? Development versus environmental protection. And it's a tough one to get right.
Yeah.
But I guess that's where the regional cooperation piece comes in, right? How do you think these potential environmental impacts will affect the relationships between those Nile Basin countries?
It's a sensitive subject, that's for sure. Those downstream countries, especially Egypt and Sudan, they're worried, about how GRD will affect their water supply.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, they depend on the Nile. If Ethiopia isn't careful with how they manage the dam's water releases, well, it could lead to some serious problems, could escalate tensions, maybe even lead to conflict.
So what would a successful water sharing agreement look like? Is there like a model they can follow, some kind of template for working this out?
Honestly, it's a tough one. There's no easy answer. I mean, the Nile Basin Initiative, it's this partnership between all the Nile riparian countries. They've been trying to come up with a cooperative framework, but it's proving pretty difficult to get everyone on the same page. I mean, you've got some folks pushing for a quota system, like each country gets a certain amount based on their population and how much they need for agriculture. Others are saying, no, we need a more flexible approach, taking into account seasonal changes, droughts, that kind of thing.
Sounds complicated. But I guess that's the point, right? This is a shared resource. Maybe we need to change how we think about these kinds of projects. Instead of seeing GRD as like Ethiopia wins, Egypt loses, this kind of zero-sum game, maybe we need to figure out how everyone can benefit.
Exactly. That's the kind of thinking that Pan-Africanism is all about. If they can find a way to cooperate to manage the Nile sustainably, everyone wins.
Imagine that, instead of fighting over water, these countries are working together, building a regional power grid, sharing electricity, boosting trade, and ultimately creating a more prosperous and interconnected region.
That's the dream, right? But, realistically, it's going to take a lot of trust, a lot of cooperation. And we're talking about countries with, historical baggage, political rivalries, competing economic interests.
It's a reminder that progress, well, it's not always easy. There are going to be bumps in the road, disagreements, frustrations. But even with all that, GERD still has so much potential.
Absolutely. And that potential, it goes beyond just the practical stuff like electricity and water. It's about changing the narrative about Africa.
It's showcasing African ingenuity, that resilience, that ability to tackle ambitious projects. It's reclaiming control, writing a new chapter.
Exactly. It's saying to the world, look, African nations don't have to depend on anyone else to solve their problems. They can do it themselves. And when they do, they inspire a whole new generation of Africans. They start to see that collective action, that shared purpose, it can actually make a difference.
That's like a ripple effect, a single project sparking a whole movement.
Yeah.
If GERE is successful, I mean, who knows what it could inspire? We could see similar projects popping up all over the continent, tackling all kinds of issues, energy poverty, food security, you name it.
And those projects, they could lead to a more integrated, a more prosperous Africa, an Africa that's ready to take its rightful place on the global stage.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here, the potential, the challenges, the symbolism, the politics. It's clear that GERD is, well, it's more than just a dam. It's a symbol of something much bigger. But before we wrap things up, I'm really curious to get your take on what happens next. Let's assume for a minute that GERD does achieve everything it set out to do.
Yeah.
What kind of legacy do you think it will leave behind?
Well, it's almost like, GERD is this testing ground for a new model of development, right? One that's led by African nations themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like a proving ground. So if it does work, I mean, really work, what kind of impact, what kind of legacy are we talking about?
I think it'll be huge, on multiple levels. First,
Right.
practically speaking, I mean, think about it. Millions of people suddenly having access to affordable electricity.
Right, lifting people out of poverty, driving economic growth.
Exactly. And then, it could boost regional cooperation.
It's not just about Ethiopia, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole neighborhood.
Right, the whole region.
Yeah.
But then there's the symbolic impact. It could really change the way the world sees Africa.
Yeah, instead of that old narrative, Africa needs help, it's like, Africa's got this.
Exactly. It's showing that they're capable of solving their own problems, being innovative, taking the lead on sustainable development.
It's like flipping the script,
Yeah.
right? Saying, look, Africa's not just a place that needs help. It's a place that offers solutions.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that could lead to a lot more investment,
Yeah.
not just from within Africa, but from, international partners too.
Because if they can pull this off, this big, complex project led by Africans, it's like, okay, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, exactly. So then it's like, okay, what's next? What other big, ambitious projects are possible?
And that's where it gets really exciting. I mean, think about it. A Pan-African energy grid connecting countries all over the continent.
Whoa, yeah. Sharing clean energy, affordable energy.
Or like agricultural projects, working together to improve food security.
Sharing knowledge, resources, technology.
Those are some big dreams, right? But if GERD teaches us anything, it's that, big dreams, they can come true.
Especially when everyone's working together, when there's that shared vision, that commitment.
And I think, more than anything, what GERD could leave behind is this sense of possibility for a new generation of Africans.
Yeah, for those leaders, those engineers, entrepreneurs, those citizens who are like, we can shape our own future,
It's like it's sparking something, igniting this belief that things can be different.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up here, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay, hit us with it.
What if, what if GUD really is just the beginning? What other incredible Pan-African projects could this inspire?
What other challenges could they tackle? Climate change, poverty, access to education, healthcare. I mean, the possibilities they're kind of endless.
Exactly. So think about that. What kind of future could we build if we really embraced this spirit of Pan-Africanism, this belief in a shared destiny, in the power of working together?
This has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about GRDs, but about this whole idea of Pan-Africanism and what it can achieve.
Me too. Me too.
And it's a good reminder that progress, well, it's not always pretty. It's messy, it's complicated, but it's worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And sometimes all it takes is one spark, one project like GERD to get a whole movement going, to inspire an entire continent.
Well said. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll keep exploring these ideas, keep learning, and keep that spark alive. Until next time, keep diving deep.
Thank you for tuning in to DC Broadcast Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions about the topics we covered or want to share your thoughts, visit dcbroadcast.com/askai. We'd love to hear from you and might even feature your question in an upcoming episode. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and subscribe to stay connected and never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious and keep listening.